Caleb stood in the kitchen, sweat-soaked and silent, absorbing the sting of an insult that hung in the air like a slap. He didn't argue or respond. He simply stood there, too exhausted to fight back. Unbeknownst to him, a customer nearby had witnessed the entire scene. That customer was none other than Keanu Reeves, the founder of the pizza chain, and what he observed that night would alter everything. Ken Rivers had been silent for years, long enough that most of the newer employees wouldn't recognize him if he stood right in front of them. He had once made headlines for starting a pizza chain from a walk-up window in a converted auto shop in Indianapolis, relying solely on hard work and good dough. At its peak, the chain boasted 42 locations and glowing customer reviews. But recently, that pride had begun to fade. The reviews had soured, complaints about cold pizza and rude staff emerging from multiple stores, indicating a troubling pattern. His regional manager, Scott Duncan, dismissed the issues as typical post-pandemic fatigue, but Ken was skeptical. The emails kept flooding in, some vague, others specific. One from a customer named Mrs. Flanagan lingered in his mind. "I watched your delivery boy get yelled at for being late, but he looked like he'd been running non-stop. Someone needs to ask why." That was 3 days ago. Tonight, Ken decided to investigate. He donned a worn gray hoodie, old jeans, and reading glasses. Placing a discreet mobile order for a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese to be delivered to a rented condo near Store 17. The one with the worst performance metrics. He tracked the delivery on his phone, growing increasingly frustrated as the minutes ticked by. 25, 38, then 54. Just as he was about to give up, there was a knock at the door. Caleb stood there, looking worn and weary, his brown curls damp and his shoes scuffed. "Sorry I'm late," he said, breathless. "I'm the only driver tonight. The other two didn't show." Ken remained silent, observing Caleb's fatigue. The box was warm on the bottom, but softening on top. "Busy night?" he asked gently. Caleb let out a dry laugh, explaining the chaos, a broken cooler, 2 people quitting, and the manager in a frenzy. "Are you getting paid overtime?" Ken inquired. Caleb looked away, revealing the harsh reality. "Technically, but they cut my hours the next day so I don't go over the weekly limit. It's company policy." Ken froze. That wasn't policy, it was exploitation. He had written the employee manual himself. Overtime was mandatory when earned. "What's your name?" Ken asked, and Caleb replied with a tired smile before heading to his dented Honda Civic. Ken set the pizza box on the counter without opening it. He wasn't hungry anymore. Instead, he felt a hollow realization that his company, built on trust and fairness, might be quietly breaking the backs of those who held it together. That night, Ken barely slept. He sat by the window, the city lights casting pale reflections on the floor. He thought about Caleb, dodging potholes and hoping for better tips, and about how someone like Ron Talbot, the store manager, would likely scold him for being late or sweaty. Ken leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, knowing he had a decision to make. Not as a CEO, but as someone who remembered what it felt like to carry a pizza bag uphill in January. The numbers on paper told one story, but Caleb's face told another, and Ken knew which one he believed. Instead of going to bed, he stayed by the window, watching the condensation shift with the rhythm of the streetlights. He thought about Caleb's shoes worn from too many shifts, and the way the kid had apologized without seeking sympathy. Most importantly, he thought about the phrase, "They cut my hours so I don't go over full time." That wasn't a mistake, it was a practice learned and repeated. If it was happening to Caleb, it was likely happening to others too. The next morning, before the sun rose over the skyline, Ken dressed in a navy ball cap and an old jacket, looking more retired than rich. He parked a few spots away from Store 17, observing the building that looked like any other, but he knew better. He walked in quietly, the scent of cheese and garlic hitting him first, but beneath that was something stale, an energy that felt off. After a moment, a girl named Elise emerged from the back, not smiling or looking up, just mechanically entering data into the register. Ken ordered a slice and a drink, then took a booth near the kitchen window, close enough to hear what needed to be heard. From the back, a voice boomed, "This dough is garbage. I've told you 3 times already, mess it up again and you're staying until close." The voice belonged to Ron Talbot, the store manager. Ken didn't need a name tag to know who he was. A younger voice mumbled a response. I'm sorry, I'll fix it. Speak up or go home and don't come back, Ron snapped. The room froze, even the overhead fan seemed to hum more quietly. Caleb walked in looking drained, and Ron immediately targeted him. You're late, he said flatly. Caleb blinked. No sir, I was scheduled for noon. Ron shot back. I told you yesterday to come in at 11 o'clock. Don't play dumb. Caleb's voice dropped. You didn't say that. So now I'm a liar? Ron's words landed heavy in the room. Ken remained still, observing the exchange. This wasn't the time for speeches or grand gestures. He needed to understand how deep the issues ran. Ken stayed quiet as Ron continued to berate Caleb, who nodded and returned to the prep table. Inside, Ken felt a shift. A question took root in his mind. How many people had been silenced in his name while he wasn't looking? The day passed slowly, and Ken remained in his booth, watching the dynamics of the store. He noticed how Elise stepped in to help when a newer worker got overwhelmed, and how Trey hummed old country songs while loading trays. Caleb didn't just work. He watched the room, adjusting the thermostat when the oven light blinked too long and slipping half a protein bar to a driver who looked exhausted. Customers began to notice the change. An older woman came in for a pickup, and Elise personally walked her to her car. A young mom with toddlers struggled to pay, and Trey quietly applied a manager discount that didn't exist. These weren't grand gestures, they were acts of dignity that had been overlooked. Later, while folding boxes with Caleb, Ken asked, You ever think of quitting? Caleb shrugged. Sure, almost every week, but I can't. Rent's due Thursday, and I don't want to leave Elise and Trey behind. Ken nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility. That afternoon, Ken returned to his office suite, where he accessed the company's scheduling system. He searched for Caleb's name and found a troubling pattern. His hours had been systematically reduced. It wasn't turnover, it was manipulation. Ken closed the laptop, rubbing his temples, recalling a time when schedules were built with care, considering employees' lives. He opened a review site and scrolled through recent feedback. The same stories repeating: late orders, rude management, exhausted workers. One post caught his eye. The kid behind the counter looked like he hadn't slept. The manager was yelling at him in front of customers. I won't be back. That night, Ken wrote 3 words in his notebook. It's happening here. The following morning, he returned to store 17, not as a customer, but as a new hire. He blended in, stacking cheese and learning the ropes. No one questioned him, they just accepted him as part of the team. Ken observed the store's operations, noting how the prep routine had been cut, how the sauce ratio was a guessing game, and how a young driver slept in his car between shifts. No one reported these issues because no one would listen. During a break, Ken gently asked Caleb, You ever think about leading? Caleb hesitated. I'm not that kind of person. Ken smiled. Maybe that's exactly why you should be. Caleb looked around, considering the state of the store and the team. The next morning, Ken arrived early and suggested a team check-in. Everyone showed up, and Caleb stood before them, nervous but steady. This place only works if we all trust each other, he said. I don't have magic solutions, but I do have ears. Talk to me. The team engaged, discussing schedules and issues openly. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Afterward, Ken quietly folded pizza boxes, blending in with the team. As the day wound down, Elise handed Ken a small box with a note taped to it. Inside was a photo of the crew smiling behind the counter with a sign that read, Store 17 still standing. Ken stared at it, realizing the significance of what they had built together. As the store dimmed into closing mode, Caleb walked the floor, adjusting and refilling, not because he had to, but because he cared. Ken met him by the door, shaking his hand firmly. You've built something good, he said. I didn't build it, Caleb replied. I just stopped letting it fall apart. As they left, the store sat in silence, but it was a peaceful silence, one that followed something earned. Meanwhile, Ron Talbot scrolled through company emails, realizing he had lost something significant. Back at store 17, a quiet hum returned, one customer at a time, one shift at a time. Led by a good leader still learning. Sometimes, leadership doesn't come with a title. It walks in tired, shows up early, and stays late to ensure no one falls through the cracks. If you've ever worked a shift unnoticed and returned the next day, this story is for you.